Arguably, the most challenging thing for me to learn when I first started kegging kombucha was how to do it on a low budget. I've been kegging kombucha for 5 years now for accounts, and that's how we sell at our farmers markets. 5 years kegging kombucha, and I still feel like I'm learning something new about how to do it better or more efficiently every day. Hi, if you're new here, my name is Addison. I run a kombucha microbrewery out of Western Wisconsin. We are a small scale, debt free kombucha brewery that sells at farmers markets and at other retailers throughout Western Wisconsin. When I first started my business, we did everything strictly pre bottled. We would pre bottle 16-ounce bottles and 32-ounce bottles, and we would haul them to various farmers markets. And it worked at the beginning, but one of the biggest reasons why we wanted to transition over to offering kegged product is because we wanted to market toward retailers like breweries, coffee shops, and co ops, all of which tend to already have some sort of kegging infrastructure in place and or appreciate the sustainability of a refillable bottle. When I first started kegging kombucha, I would have killed for a tutorial video like this. So let's go over today how I keg kombucha in a low-tech kombucha brewery. First things first, you're going to want to start with clean kegs. Now, it is possible to clean kegs by hand, but it is super time consuming and kind of just a pain in the butt. Washing, rinsing, and sanitizing kegs by hand is no joke, so what I would recommend instead is reaching out to one of your local breweries, one that has a keg cleaning machine. You could offer to pay them to use it, you could offer to use it yourself, or you could always offer some sort of barter of services. Okay, now onto the anatomy of a keg. We have three basic parts. There is the keg itself, then there is the keg spear, which fits inside of the keg and funnels liquid up. And then lastly, there is the lock ring, which locks the keg spear into place inside of the keg. These kegs operate by injecting CO2 into the keg, which then pressurizes it and forces the liquid up and out through the top of the keg spear. So since we're working with something that is pressurized, we want to depressurize it before we try and open it up. That's where this tool comes into play. It has a kind of screw top, and you screw it down, and the round part right here sort of presses down on the top of the spear and releases the pressure that's built up inside of the keg. Now that our keg is depressurized, we're moving on to removing the lock ring, which there is a bit of a learning curve to this, but it's not that hard, especially when you have the proper tools. Here we have what's called a lock ring removal knife that has a very pointed tip. And you'll see here on the lock ring, there is a specific groove that is in the lock ring. And the tip of this knife fits exactly in that groove to help pop and pry the lock ring out. I do also have on hand an arsenal of supplemental sharp pointy tools. I sometimes use these as additional leverage to help pop the lock ring out. So here it is in action. We're using that lock ring removal knife to pry behind that groove in the lock ring and then wedging a small screwdriver behind the ring, and it should pop out nice and easy. And from there you can remove your keg spear to access the inside of the keg to clean it or fill it. All right, our clean keg is opened up and now it's time to fill it. We operate using a 150-gallon fermenter, and it hooks up to a pump that we pump the kombucha out of the fermenter directly into our kegs. When we first started, we brewed out of 5-gallon buckets, and we would just pour the kombucha out of the bucket directly into the keg via a funnel. So that's an option too if you're not using a fermenter yet. Our fermenter operates using a tri-clamp valve, so we hook up a hose to this nozzle here, and then we can utilize the blue lever to open and close the flow. So here's some footage of us setting up the pump. You just hook up the hose to that nozzle there, and then the hose connects directly to the pump. And then on the opposite side of the pump, there is another hose that will connect. That hose is open on the opposite end, so the kombucha can flow directly into the kegs via that hose. So to recap, you open up the valve, the kombucha flows through that first hose, goes through the pump, and then flows through the second hose directly into your vessel. When filling, you want to keep in mind to leave a bit of headspace at the top so your vessel can carbonate a little more efficiently. That headspace also accounts for the keg spear needing to go back in because it can displace the liquid and then you have a big spill on your hands. Okay, your keg is filled and we are ready to reassemble it. This is basically the same exact steps that we did at the beginning, just in the opposite order. You're going to place your keg spear directly back in. You'll see there are two little bump outs on the keg spear that fit directly into two little notches on the rim of your keg. You'll fit the spear into those notches and then turn it a tiny bit clockwise, and that like semi-pseudo locks it into place before you actually go back in and lock it into place with the lock ring. For this step, I use a vice grip. This is what I was taught to use by the brewers in my town. The removal and replacing of the lock ring is hands down the most difficult part of this whole process. But essentially what you're doing here is using those vice grips to sort of guide and wedge the lock ring back into place until it is all the way secured and locking that spear into place. Here's some additional footage of that just because I think it's helpful to have a visual of what it looks like getting that sucker back in there. On to carbonating. We force carbonate our kegs. We set and forget them. So we have our CO2 tank hooked up to a 6-way CO2 manifold so we can carbonate 6 kegs at a time. We have our PSI set to somewhere between 30-35, and we leave them to carbonate for anywhere between 2 to 4 days. So that's how we do it. I hope that was helpful. I tried to be as thorough and detailed as possible on the process and just sort of the nuances that come along with it. It took me a very long time to figure out how to do this without me wanting to rip my hair out. That being said, I didn't have a tutorial like this to guide me, so I hope that nobody else out there feels like they need to rip their hair out whenever they are trying to learn how to do this. Anyway, if you like more small business kombucha related content, please give a follow. I post videos about kombucha, about running my kombucha small business, and also about the process of building out a commercial shared use kitchen that we are currently in the process of. Thanks so much for being here. See you next time.